Welcome to the ACP, Association of Contingency Professionals International Webinar Series. This is our first for 2021. It's entitled Return to Work, the most important issue you've completely overlooked. So let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Please adjust your audio if you're having issues. We'll be answering questions at the end. However, you can submit questions at any time. Please do so through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will not be using the chat function feature for this webinar. I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors. I'm not going to read them all. I'm sure you recognize quite a few of these. I want to thank our sponsors for today. And I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Robbie LaRocca, ACP board member and chair of the Education Committee. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. His name is Bo Mitchell. He was police commissioner of Wilton, Connecticut for many years. He retired to found 9/11 Consulting, which he does emergency, disaster recovery, business continuity, communications, pandemic plans, plus training exercises for many, many organizations. I do want to say that he is absolutely as fierce as he looks. I can tell you that for sure. He serves clients headquarters from Boston to LA, working in their facilities from London to San Francisco. He has earned 22 certifications in Homeland Security, Emergency Management, Disaster Recovery, Business Continuity, Safety, and Security. He also serves as an expert in landmark court cases nationally. And I would like to have our speaker come on and just say, here's Bo.
Return to work, the most important issue you've completely overlooked. So what does all that mean? Well, let's go back to March. You remember March. It seems like 10 years ago, not 10 months ago, but all hell broke loose and we have a pandemic on it and everybody had to go home. It was quite a time. And of course, everybody instituted their business continuity plan and their training by work from home. And it all seems so simple, you know, send them home. This is perfect. They'll be fine. What could go wrong? Well, as we learned with our work from home, as far as our business continuity is concerned, is it got shattered. Why did it get shattered? Well, IT was not scalable, as it turned out. All employees needed new equipment, new software. There were electrical issues and Wi-Fi issues that had to be solved house by house. The organization needed security upgrades. Management needed new skills because we'd never done this before, except for maybe an exercise, maybe if you did exercise it. And of course, the command control and communications issues were seriously challenged. So we thought we had this all squared away, and then we learned that it was not so simple. It was complicated. And then galloping in as if they were the 7th Cavalry, we had a lot of people looking over our shoulders from the national and federal level, wondering how we were treating people from a safety standpoint, from a health standpoint. So all of this experience last March proved something that my mother said to me at a very young age. For every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's always wrong. Now, work from home is not wrong. Obviously, that's been a huge solution here. But simple? No, it isn't simple. So return to work was a real issue. And now we're going to go back to work. So what does return to work look like? And what is that most important issue you've completely overlooked? Well, we've realized that from our experience in March, this isn't going to be simple, that's for sure. And, you know, here's some guidelines. You know, lots of people issue guidelines these days on about how we return to work. I picked on OSHA here because, hey, they're in the employee safety world and they have and we have a compliance obligation to them. So I picked theirs. It replicates what a lot of others are doing. And employees fully expect these will be implemented by you. So that isn't the most important issue that you've completely overlooked. The most important issue you've completely overlooked is trust. Trust in you as the boss. So, of course, this is America, and we have research on this. And the research is that 84% of bosses feel they're doing a great job during COVID-19. Well, okay, and they're in an echo chamber of talking to each other, reconfirming this bias. They call it the confirmation bias. But now we talk to employees, and only half of U.S. employees deem office spaces safe as they go back, as they contemplate sending them back to work. And just 14% of workers say they trust their CEOs and senior managers to safely lead them back to work. 84% of CEOs think they do a great job, but look at that. Only 14% of workers say they trust their CEOs and senior management to safely lead them back to work. So trust is the problem.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
So we're going to see if you can handle the truth about what's really going on with your employees and their lack of trust as far as you're concerned. I am Bo Mitchell. I am president of 911 Consulting. I was police commissioner of Wilton, Connecticut for 16 years. I retired to start 911 Consulting to work with organizations like yours regarding the safety of employees like yours in facilities just like yours. All those initials after my name indicate that I'm trained and board certified in emergency management, disaster recovery, business continuity, pandemic plans, and a bunch of other stuff, all of which we'll talk about today. I'm also an expert consultant in landmark legal cases against employers like you with the expected settlements in the billions of dollars. And guess what the negligence issues at court are? Failure to plan and failure to train. And that's what we're going to talk about today, planning and training, to give trust back into you as far as your employees are concerned. Our clients at 911 Consulting are large headquarters companies who work at their headquarters and for their facilities in the field. We've also worked for 31 campuses nationwide. And I've been a speaker at all the places you would expect, NFPA, FEMA, OSHA, and for BC, for business continuity people all over the country, speaking for them, and especially for ACP, both national webinars like the one we're doing right now, New York City chapter, Boston, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and the Eastern Great Lakes Association as well. So, best question at this point to ask is, how long will this COVID-19 last? Well, we have a precedent about how this goes, and so far that precedent has played out well a century later. And that precedent is the 1918 to 1920, yes, it was 2 years, pandemic at the beginning of the century, which killed 650,000 Americans. Now, you can see that there's a real alarm here as far as this precedent is concerned. 650,000 Americans were killed in a country that had only 100 million Americans, 1/3 of what it is today. So do the math, and it says that this pandemic a century ago was 6 times more lethal as to the one we're experiencing now so far. So how is it going to end? Well, vaccinations are going to be a big part of this stuff, but you know, the logistics on this are tough. 330 million Americans have to get a shot twice. So that's going to be a lot of shots that have to be done in a very short time. And the way we tell our clients to plan as far as when the pandemic will be over and we'll get back to some kind of normalcy on a grand ubiquitous basis is really to plan that this is going to go on all year and won't end in normalcy, whatever that looks like, until Christmas of this year. Once again, for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's always wrong. Vaccinations aren't wrong, but it's very, very complicated stuff. So what's the most important issue that you've completely overlooked? It's trust. Trust in you as the boss, because we've seen that your employees don't trust you. And why don't your employees don't trust you? Well, we've talked about the reopening guidelines from OSHA, and they fully expect that these are things that you're going to implement. But why don't they trust you? Well, here is my experience from working with my clients over the last 10 months as to why they will not trust you. There are 8 points here. Let me take you through them. First, the commute. You've told them to come back to work. Now, how stringent you are about them coming back to work and what you're telling them to do if they don't come back to work, that's your business. But the commute is an issue because many of them are going to be using public transportation, a train or a subway or some kind of, or buses. Maybe you want them to carpool. That could be a fine idea because it limits the exposure, but it is an exposure issue here you have to work out. So carpooling may be a way of doing this as far as telling your people, earning back their trust as to how to do this. Many of my clients are headquarters companies, and they have their own transportation via buses, which is a real nice perk. But once again, what are we doing here? How does that work when we ask them or tell them that they're coming back? The next thing up beyond the commute is policing your procedures. You've instituted all these procedures, whether it be temperatures, checking analog on a digital basis, how they ride the elevators, the Purell issues, visitors, and the rest of it, and how they're vectored around your premises. And how are you going to hold meetings now? You're going to do that in person with 6 feet of separation, or you're going to continue with what we've all become used to as far as remote meetings are concerned, especially now as they're moving back and forth. For some people, or maybe most people, working from home and some working in the office, and that those proportions changing as the year goes on. How are you managing this? We can say we're going to do this, and that's okay as a start, but do they really trust you to police this and make sure that it works exactly right? Next up is the food chain, because hey, you got to eat. So how's that going to work when you bring people back into your office? You're going to keep everybody in and say they can't go out because that's an exposure issue, or you're going to let them go out and back, and that's better from an exposure standpoint, or worse? Meals from home, does that make sense? How to store, refrigerate, serving, catering, delivering, the cleanup afterwards, however this happens, for at least 1 meal during the day, and in some of your cases 2 or even 3 meals a day, depending on how you run your business. So what does that look like? Well, you might be catering on, you might be serving food on premises. Plenty of my clients have that capability, and that could be terrific. And as far as you who don't have this capability, you know, the United States military has been doing this for a couple of 100 years, feeding a lot of people during their day as they're going through their workday. And clearly your schools do this, at least for 1 meal, if not more, as far as employees and students are concerned. Or maybe you bring the stuff from the outside, catering. Because that's an easy way of doing it. And maybe the catering isn't so wonderful as looking like this. It might be individual servings, which can work out real well. And that could be the way that you approach things. Or maybe you'd like to go retro and have everybody bring their own stuff to work, their own meals to work. And that can work out too. But there are issues here. And this is where you're trying to build trust, or where you don't have any trust right now. How are you going to do this? What does this look like? Don't just tell me, show me. And of course, there's the cleanup after all of these meals. We have to remember they have to be able to do this not just day 1, but probably for the next 11 months. What about requiring masks and vaccinations? Well, we've told everybody they have to wear a mask, and that's terrific, but how are we enforcing that? And we have to remember that masks, or facial coverings, as they're more liberally called, are out there. And the government has said anybody can really retail this and make up whatever kind of mask you want to. And CDC and OSHA, remember OSHA, they're the people with the regulatory power, have said that's okay, we're going to do that. Any kind of mask, any kind of face covering works for us. But now you brought them back to work. So we have to redouble our efforts here in order to make sure that we're doing this right as far as the regulations are concerned regarding the facial coverings. So the question has to be asked, are these facial coverings issued at no cost to the employee? Well, that's what you're supposed to do. Do they know how to fit them? Do they know how to use them once they've been fitted correctly for a long-term basis, not just day 1, but for month 3 and month 10? Do they know how to clean and maintain those masks? Because without that, then they don't have an effective face covering. Do they know how to dispose them? EPA is very much worried about this, as is OSHA. Do you know how to replace it? Because they're going to wear out over a long term. We have to think in the term of all of this year to 2021. If they have to replace them, can they do that at no cost? And that means no cost to them, and the cost is to the employer. So, is all of this covered by some kind of regulation? Oh, of course it is. For 30 years, OSHA's had regulations on these kinds of PPE, and there's the citation for you, 29 CFR 1910.132. So, you know, this is your responsibility, and they want to be able to trust you. Right now they don't. that you know this is all about, and you're going to implement this stuff, going beyond the words and doing the deeds. Now, we've said that vaccinations is going to be a big, big part of fixing all this, and that's true. And what about that, though? Can you require, as an employer, vaccination? Is that a good idea? If you can, that you demand it of your people. And who's going to do this? The state, your local governments, you? When and how does this get done? There's a lot of work to be done here, and they're all very worried about this because vaccinations sound great, but for every complex problem, there's a simple solution that's always wrong because it is complicated and it's hard to do. And then the next issue my clients tell me are in place here is workplace violence. Why is that a case? Well, because workplace violence is ubiquitous. It's by far the biggest threat to any workplace in the United States of America, bigger than fires or anything else. Why? Because the Department of Justice reports that there are 2 million instances of workplace violence annually. And look what they are. This is every hour. 26 rapes, 200 aggravated assaults, 3,000 threats. This is per hour. Now you can say to me, yeah, but Bo, we're only coming back 25 or 50% in the beginning. Well, that's true, but you're going for 100%, so you have to bear this in mind. And even if you take 50% of these per hour, this is a huge situation, a big threat. It is the biggest threat to the workplace violence. The way I like to put it is the average workplace is 18 times more likely to have violence in the workplace than a fire. So that is the scale of what it is that you're doing here. And what does workplace violence consist of? Well, intimate partner violence is a huge thing. And you could say, well, that's about the home, that's not about us. It's not true, because intimate partner violence kills 1,300 people every year. And the way that men, and it's always about guys, come after women, and it's always about women as victims, almost always, the workplace is a great target to know when she is going to be coming there or leaving there, or is going to be on that premises, so that he knows where she is. On average, two employees are murdered in the American workplace every day with a firearm or a knife. And now it isn't just intimate partner violence, as we've seen the statistics. What about workplace bullying? We've done a lot about campus bullying in the United States of America over the last few years. Every state now has a regulation or a law on this. But on workplace violence, there are no regulations. And this is far bigger, the research says, than anything that had to do with campus bullying. Now, we don't know a lot about active shooters. We do know one thing about active shooters. All of them have been bullied at school or at work or in the neighborhood, and usually a combination of all three. This is 100% true for all of the active shooters that you've ever heard of. And what's going on during the pandemic? The murder rate in the top 23 cities in the United States is up 23% during the pandemic. And what's this all about as far as workplace violence? Well, what's the core causes for it? It's stress. And think about your employees and the stress that they're under. They worry about work. They worry about family and school. They worry about commuting. They worry about a second wave or a third wave or a fourth wave. You get to pick. Another quarantine and family income. Are you going to furlough them again? Are you going to lay them off? Are you going to keep them forever? These are all the stressful issues that are going on inside each and every one of your employees. And recognizing how employees may become violent, because it's happened so often, we have guidelines. We have yellow flags, as they're called. These are the longer term. It isn't going to happen tomorrow, but these are the kinds of things that build, that make people go violent in the workplace. We can train your employees to recognize this amongst themselves, or for their peers to recognize it in them. So we can train your employees on this. Then the red flags. Again, the experts have done this because it's so ubiquitous as far as workplace violence is concerned. We know what the red flags are, and we're going to train your employees to recognize this amongst your peers. Now, you can tell me, well, Bo, this sounds like it's a lot of this is about what happens at home versus what happens at the workplace. Well, right now, the home and your offices are both workplaces. And we have to think about this over 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months, looking at it from the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2000 to the end of it, as I predict it will be by Christmas of 2021. And the next thing we have to worry about is civil unrest. This is what I hear from my clients long before the invasion of the Capitol a week ago. Why? Well, it's already happened. This went on for 6 months on Wall Street. 6 months of unrest going on with Occupy Wall Street. And New York wasn't the only target for this. It happened in Washington State. It happened around the country, not everywhere, but a number of places. And this went on for a very, very long time. So this is what happened last week is not unprecedented by any means as far as the effect on your workplace is concerned. And it was a real efficiency attacker and a real productivity attacker. And a lot of people were working from home to avoid this, not on the scale that we're working on now, but civil unrest then and now is a huge problem. Have you earned the trust of your people by saying, we understand this and we're working on this as far as you coming to work? The next issue that my clients tell me that their employees are worried about as far as the trust issues are concerned are weapons at work. Guns at work, people bringing weapons to work because there's a lot of stress going on out there, a lot of unpredictability, and people do these kinds of things. Whether it's smart enough, we can have a conversation. We aren't here to talk about what might be. We're here to talk about what is. And let's look at this. We always want to say, well, that gun thing, that must be about people out there, wherever out there is. It's about those people, whoever those people are. Well, it turns out it's us. Look about this. Guns seized at airports by the Transportation Security Administration. These are our people. 300% up since the pandemic began. So somebody bringing a gun to work, not necessarily using it, but just having the gun at work is an issue. It probably violates your policy. This is easy. We find out that Joe brought a gun to work, or Josephine, and we just call the police. Well, please understand my experience around this country, and I've worked in your city probably over the last 30 years. I probably worked in your city and had this conversation with your police department. And they tell me they probably won't come. That's not true everywhere, but for the vast majority of the police won't come. Why? Because carrying a pistol, if you're not doing something ugly with it, carrying a pistol isn't illegal for everybody in any jurisdiction in the United States of America, including New York City. Permits are issued all the time for this kind of thing. So people having a gun isn't necessarily an emergency to which police should respond. And the first thing I'm going to ask you over the phone when you make that call is, well, what's your policy? Do you have procedures about this? Because alone, that is not probable cause for any of us to come out and search and seize. There's no reason for that. So in most of your police departments, that's not going to happen. And the eighth one out of the eighth that I wanted to talk about today is all hazards. Now, what does that mean? Well, I think the best threshold to cross as far as getting that started, as far as your workplace is concerned, is to look at the configuration of your workplace. So here we are in early 2020 before the virus. For some reason, we all gave up the office that was going to be 8 by 10 with doors and a ceiling, and we went to this. And this has become ubiquitous. Why, I'm not sure. It certainly looks like a leveler. Everybody working right on top of each other. Well, that was fine for then, but if we're going to have social distancing, now we're going to be working like this. So how do we go from here to here? Well, you know the answer to that question because you probably have already done it or are underway right now. You reconfigure your workspace. Well, that makes a lot of sense because you want to ensure that your social distancing, you want to earn the trust of your employees by ensuring that the social distancing is working. But when you reconfigure your workspace, all of the people who control you as far as compliance are concerned, including your local fire department, OSHA, and the NFP, say that is a trigger for training. You've just reconfigured your workspace. And you may say, yeah, but all I did was put up a couple of plexiglass. You know, that's not renovation. No, it isn't renovation. But the threshold as far as these people are concerned about reconfiguration is very, very low. You start to play around with your workspace as far as your means of egress and the rest of it are concerned, and they say that you have a trigger for training. And that's by law. Nobody's asking you to do it. They're telling you to do that. So how do we make sure that this happens? What is the platform for this discussion? Well, the platform shouldn't surprise you at all. That's your emergency action plan. By the way, that's a term of law, emergency action plan. No other title fits appropriately. And now we want to talk about your emergency action plan. And what about your emergency action plan? Do you know if it's compliant with all the standards? And please remember, OSHA is not a town in Wisconsin. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Agency in Washington, D.C., which has been writing regulations regarding employee safety for 50 years, 1970 to 2020. And they have regulations that say that every employer is included. Doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, what kind of model you have, or where you are in the country. And it goes on further to say that you shall have an emergency action plan and you shall have a fire prevention plan. This is in addition to anything that's required by your state fire code or your local fire code. So suddenly now we're in a discussion about what OSHA and all of these other organizations to whom you must honor as far as your compliance is concerned. So what does all hazards mean? All these people say you have to have an emergency action plan and train it. Well, what is the table of contents? Because none of the regulations there tell you what the table of contents is. But there is a standard that says that you can. The National Fire Protection Association has been around since 1896. And in the ensuing 125 years, they've written 300 standards, one of which is NFPA 1600. Your standard of emergency management, disaster recovery, business continuity, the very subject we're talking about today. And NFPA 1600 says it shall be all hazards. So this isn't your father's fire plan. It isn't just about fire and weather. It's about all these things. Now, I didn't make up this table of contents. This is on page 7 of NFPA 1600, and I invite you to download it and take a look at it. Curl up in front of the fire tonight and read all 55 pages of NFPA 1600. And there it is. This is all hazards planning. You don't get to pick and choose the emergency. The emergency picks you. So NFPA 1600 and all the people who apply that standard, which is all those logos I showed you before, say this is the standard for your emergency action plan. Now, behind all this is something called duty of care, a legal proposition, actually a legal mandate that says you have a duty of care to keep everybody on your premises safe. And it's an affirmative duty of care, your general counsel, your lawyers will tell you. In other words, it's not something we should just do when we get around to it in the next fiscal year. You're supposed to have this in place. It's an affirmative duty of care. Now, people ask me all the time, well, what does that mean? It sounds sort of foggy and ambiguous to me. I really don't know what that means. And I say, well, I can show you all the court cases and the law and all this, and it'll fill up your conference room with paper. But I'm going to give it to you in one simple sentence. Everything is always your fault. When it comes to the safety of employees, visitors, contractors, interns, paid or not, everything is always your fault. You have the duty of care. The employee has no duty of care. It's always the employer, never the employee. So that's the duty of care. Now, people say to me, oh, Bo, that's just stuff that you consultants give us to scare us into buying something from you, paying your fees. Well, it's not foggy and it's not murky at all. Here's your duty of care. Each employer shall furnish a place of employment free from recognized hazards that are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. So do you think that includes a virus? Do you think that includes a guy with a gun? Do you think that includes a fire and all of the things we put up on the screen? It sure does. And there's your duty of care. Let's go to the statistics. The DOJ says 4 million workplace injuries annually. 112,000 structural fires at work, not in residences. This is just at work. 350,000 hazardous materials spills every year. 800,000 shipments daily of hazardous materials in all over the United States government. 60,000 spills yearly. A train on vehicle collision every 90 minutes. Are there any railroad tracks near you? Yeah, there are. What about somebody who is transporting those hazardous materials in front of your building and you have a spill? What about a tornado? What about workplace bullying? What about stalking in the workplace? Another DOJ identifiable threat to the workplace. What about somebody like Joe who brings a gun to work? Now, I know this would never happen in your workplace, but when it does, do you have a plan for that? Because it's against your policy. And if you call the police department, they aren't coming. This is on you. What about the theft of intellectual property or real property? An explosion in your building and the building next door, a bomb threat. What if the power goes out like it did here and during a work day, and 50 million people, including those in Boston, New York, Washington, and Chicago and Detroit, suddenly don't have any power? Everybody did everything wrong that day, by the way. What about somebody above you or below you who has a burst pipe in the winter? Does that happen? Well, that could lose your building for 2 or 3 months. It sure could if somebody isn't responding quickly to it. What about a suspicious package? What about the unattended backpack? This scares every police chief in the United States of America, the unattended backpack, because it's so easily carried and left behind. What's in there? They think, your police chief thinks that this is the next way that the terrorism event will occur. 10,000 heart attacks at work, says the American Red Cross. Slips, trips, and falls. These are the biggest worker comp submissions in the United States of America. So 5,000 Americans will die, employees will die in the American workplace this year as they do every year. And there are 1 million phone calls every day to 911. And guess where they're coming from, those million phone calls? People at work, not just people at home, people at work. Why? Because our waking hours, a majority of our waking hours as Americans are spent at work every week. So maybe you say, Bo, I have a plan. It's not a problem. And maybe you have these things in your plan. Probably not all of these things, but let's be diplomatic and say you've got all of these things. Well, against the standard, they look pretty lonely. So you haven't done the job, because that's the standard to which you will be held at court. So what about your emergency action plan? Well, I have some experiences I'd like to bring to you. I have reviewed 1,000 emergency action plans over the last 36 years. Guess how many of them are OSHA compliant? 1. And you see my client list. It isn't the Bo Mitchell Storm Door Factory. These are Fortune 500, Fortune 50, Fortune 5 corporations. Not one of them had an OSHA compliant emergency action plan. So with these experiences and that research and these surveys, I can guarantee 3 things in life: death, taxes, and you don't have an emergency action plan that complies with the law. Oh, you say, Bo, not a problem. I got a landlord, terrific people, wonderful property management. Ladies and gentlemen, I can guarantee 4 things in life: death, taxes. You don't have an emergency action plan that complies with the law, and your landlord does not have an emergency action plan that complies with the law for himself or for you. Oh, Bo, it's not a problem. I got this covered. Our parent company, really smart people, at least that's what they tell us, they must have this. I can guarantee 5 things in life: death, taxes. You don't have an emergency action plan. Your landlord doesn't have an emergency action plan, and your parent company is completely clueless and does not have an emergency action plan that complies with the law. And there you are, not complying with the standard. So let's look at some of these things that go beyond the things that you may have in your plan. The basic blocking and tackling, as you might look at it, although what you see on your screen is what the standard says is the basic blocking and tackling. Let's go back to drugs. Oh, you say, well, that's really something that happens at home. That doesn't happen in workplaces. Well, that's simply not true, but you have a workplace now at home. And during this year, you're going to have people working from home, and that is a workplace for which you're responsible. And that is the law of the land. You're responsible for your workplace in their home. Talk to your lawyer. You can run from this. You cannot hide. And you're going to have people going back and forth between this over 6, 12, or 18 months by the time this is all over. So when we talk about drugs in the workplace, this is ubiquitous, unfortunately, because this is what's happening in the United States of America and has been for many, many decades, whether it's illegal drugs or prescription drugs that are legal. So when we find these things, a lot of my clients say, really, I don't want to touch this thing. It's just too ugly, and it's going to be a very messy situation that's going to cause people not to trust me. And Bo, you've told me that the problem is trust. Well, you can't hear, seek, and speak no evil. You got to address this. It's in your policy to address it, and you can't just ignore it. And what's happening during the pandemic? The DEA reports that drug overdoses up 20% during the pandemic, and the purchase of alcohol in all of its forms is up 75%, says Nielsen, during the pandemic. Divorces, filings are up 30%. During the pandemic. As far as mental health is concerned, the Kaiser Foundation reports that it's gone from 1/3 to 1/2 of employees who feel that they are negatively impacted in their medical health. And look at the breakdown of this as far as the demography is concerned. Women, young adults, Black adults who have had a financial, and those who've had a financial impact, which I think is everybody, report a mental health negativity. So this is what's going on out there. Which brings us, unfortunately, and I don't want to be dismissive here, it brings us to suicide. Now I hear your eyes rolling. Really, Bo, you're going to have a suicide discussion with me today? Yes, I am. Here are the statistics. The auto deaths and gun violence, we hear these statistics on a regular basis on the news. About 40,000 people each die from these things. Suicides, 20% above that, and rising. This is 2018, before the virus. Can you imagine now that all of these things, including suicides, are up? So what happened? What's more evidence on this? Well, on April 19th, a year before we had the virus, 1,800 people called the Suicide Lifeline. This is a United States government lifeline. This isn't somebody down the street or some nonprofit. This is the United States government reporting to you. In April of 20, it went up, what is that? 10 times, 18 times, 100 times? It went up to 20,000. And who are the people committing suicide? We always say, well, that's about them, those weak people out there. Well, it's middle-aged white men using firearms to kill themselves, and they represent 70% of suicides. This isn't about them. This is about us. And speaking more about the boss, 8 out of 10 corporate executives have experienced poor mental health during the coronavirus crisis, prompting a number of them to reevaluate and improve work-life balance. Well, here we are doing exactly that amongst the people who think they're doing such a great job. 30% suicides are up 30% in the military. The military is very, very concerned about this, and this is during the virus. And how is this impacting? During the virus, 10% of all adult males have considered suicide. And you can see the rest of the statistics here as you break down the demography. What about depression? Well, again, all the numbers are up during the pandemic. The number of people being screened for anxiety and for depression is up multiple times. Again, this is the United States government reporting these things to you. So bad has the suicide become that for the first time since 1968, 50 years ago, before many of you were born, or only during your lifetime, have there been a 3-digit number assigned for emergencies, 911 in 1968. And in July of last year, 2020, that's 6 months ago, the federal government, the FCC, has assigned 988. You're supposed to have this on your phones in your offices now, as far as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is concerned. That's how prevalent this has become as far as the government is concerned. So what is the warning signs of suicide? Well, we know what they are, and we can train your employees to do that because the stress is there and you're bringing it back in the office. It was already in an office that you have responsibility for as far as work from home is concerned, and now you're bringing it back to the office on a regular basis. What are the yellow flags for employees who may become violent? Well, again, as experts, we've developed what these warning signs are, what these yellow flags are. Yellow flags meaning over a long-term basis, and we can train your employee. We also know what the red flags mean, meaning that this is far more imminent as far as your peers looking at their employees. And again, we can train your employees. We can train your employees on all of these things, including suicide. And basically what it boils down to is that they see something and they say something. And that is the way that we avoid these things in the majority. Right now, we aren't doing that. So what about your emergency action plan? Let's go back to your emergency action plan and talk about the 4-minute rule, because that's very much a part of what's going on here. We used to think of the 4-minute rule as only about heart attacks, because in 4 minutes, if you haven't done something about a heart attack, you're probably gone. But it's also true in the real sense as far as a fire is concerned, because all the bad things happen in the first 4 minutes. Or a guy with a gun outside your offices or inside your offices, or a tornado coming at you, workplace bullying, stalking in the workplace. The 4-minute rule applies. You have to get on top of this as the employer, because it's your duty of care to keep everybody safe, in 4 minutes. Whether it's happening with drugs, the theft of intellectual property, the theft of real property, an explosion in your building, a bomb threat, a lockdown, somebody dumping hazardous materials outside your offices. The 4-minute rule applies to all emergencies. That's the way you have to think about these things. You got to do something in the first 4 minutes if you're going to be able to get a handle on this thing. Okay, so you say, yeah, but I'm going to call 911 and the police and fire are going to come. Well, in your jurisdiction, and I've been working in your jurisdiction, so I can tell you, having looked up the research, that police and fire and EMS will respond in 4 to 18 minutes. There are some places that are long beyond that, especially if you're out in a very rural kind of situation. But in most of municipalities, 4 to 18 minutes, which means police and fire can't deploy in time, being the 4-minute rule. They can't deploy in time. So your next insight here is that police and fire are not the first responders. They are the official responders, especially in the first 4 to 18 minutes. So if they aren't the first responders, guess who the first responders are? Your employees are the first responders. You can't change the physics. This is the truth of the matter. Your employees are the first responders. And that's why OSHA requires that you have an emergency action plan in which you assign a team of employees, and that is required by law, to respond to the emergency. Which brings me to something I learned in the United States Army when we were planning operations. Amateurs talk strategy. Professionals talk logistics. What do we mean by logistics? Well, in the Army, it was beans, bullets, bandages, bathrooms, fuel, very important, and of course, vaccinations, because a sick Army isn't one that can fight. But what does that mean for you as far as logistics are concerned? Well, do you have an emergency team that you have assigned inside of your organization that's large enough to take care of any one of these emergencies? Do you have command, control, and communications necessary to do that, including a chain of command? Because here is what you should look like. This is an employee, your emergency commander, assigned by you, organized by you to take care of it. And if he isn't there, there has to be a backup. In fact, several backups, depending upon your model and what your normal business hours are, or after business hours are, depending upon what it is that you do. And able to talk to the incident commander, that's somebody, police, fire, or ambulance, who's going to come. Here's your chain of command, and here's your chain of communications to address your emergency. And if you have a building manager, he or she has to be in this too. All of this has to be carefully, these logistics have to be carefully planned. It isn't just that we have run, hide, fight. Well, what does that mean? It isn't just that we respond to a fire by evacuate. What does that mean? How does that occur? The logistics are what professionals look like. So we've talked about chain of command, command and control. What about communications?
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
And failures to communicate happen all the time during emergencies. If you can't communicate, you can't respond, which means this is the only way you're going to be able to do this. You need the two-way radios or walkie-talkies if you prefer, because this is the only way you command and control and communicate during an emergency. Cell phones won't work during an emergency. This is not an emergency response capability. Why? Because it's point to point, not broadcast, and you have plenty of places inside your buildings where they just don't work at all. What about special needs persons? Talking about logistics, special needs persons during emergencies, really, really important. And all of these people have just pages after pages after pages of how you're supposed to plan and train to take care of your special needs personnel. So going again to logistics, great plans are a smart thing. Training is everything. And training is required for an emergency action plan. It's mandatory under OSHA regulations. You shall train all employees. You shall do so in a classroom. You should do so annually. You shall do so at hire, and you shall use a qualified trainer, somebody qualified by experience in training or training. So if you haven't done this in the last 365 days, 64 days, then you haven't complied with the law. And an operational necessity, because if we haven't trained everybody, we haven't gotten the words off the paper and in people's heads so they know what they're doing. OSHA for 3 decades, or no, more than 3 decades, 1985, has said that on-screen training can supplement, it can never substitute for the annual in-person training. But during the virus, they've said it's okay that you do on-screen training for employees. So there's no inhibition, there's no obstacle to getting this done. I make a promise to my clients, you give me your employees 3 hours annually, and I'll give you back employees confident they know what to do exactly during any kind of emergency, like the long list that we've talked about here. How do I know that this works? How can I implement that training promise with such confidence? Well, look at the research. Your employees, when asked, American employees across the country year after year are asked by reputable survey takers, what's your most important issue at work? 85% come back and say that safety is the most important issue at work. This was before the virus. Do you think that number is bigger now? I think it probably is. And what was the safety was more important than wages, leave, sick days, overtime, all the things I thought would be number one as far as their biggest issue at work. In fact, there was no number two. Safety was their most important issue, and this is before the virus. I have trained 39,000 employees over the last 20 years I've been a consultant. I give a survey out at the end of the training asking them if they're confident now they know how to do this. 98.5% said that they were confident of those 39,000 people. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we know that kind of success in training is not about my boyish charm. It's about making the training all about them and their most important issue. Took the scary out of discussion, made everybody comfortable, empowered all to know what to do when the peat moss hits the fan. And this is the way that you prove trust to them and rebuild your trust. The most important issue you completely overlooked, trust. Because trust in you as the boss is what's going on here. And most of you feel that you're doing just a peachy job, but employees simply don't agree with you and are completely at the other end of it. So let's review what's going on here. Yes, we're going to conquer this pandemic, but it's going to take time. It's going to take time. You should plan that it's going to take all year to do that. Why don't employees trust you? Because there are a whole long list of things that I've learned from my clients about why they don't trust you. The commute, policing the procedures you have. How are they going to eat there? What about masks? What about vaccinations? What about workplace violence, civil unrest, guns at work, and the whole long list of things that they expect that you're going to protect them from. And a vast majority of people don't trust you as far as this is concerned. And don't forget, there are people that they can turn to your employees regarding turning to OSHA, who gets 100,000 phone calls every year to their number complaining about employers. And that's going to happen to you if you don't do this right. So how do we get them to trust you? You exercise your duty of care. You realize that you have to reconfigure your space, and reconfiguration kicks off a trigger to training required by law. How do you get employees to trust you? You make sure your emergency action plan is in great shape. You train all your employees. You prove to them that you're a professional. As far as help right now is concerned, and I'm happy to give these things to you for free, help right now for you is a copy of this presentation. All you got to do is ask for it. A work from home safety checklist, because you're still going to have people working from home and there are safety issues there, and you're required by law to take responsibility for that, whether you like it or not. And then next, a legal document, 10 Commandments of Emergency Planning for Employers. This is all of the court cases, all of the regulations and statutes regarding your requirements under emergency planning for your employees, and then 10 Commandments of Emergency Training, employee training for your workplace. Again, all the laws, regulations, and statutes about which tell you that you have to train your employees at least annually. And finally, a return to work checklist that includes all of these things that can rebuild your trust. And we're happy to provide these to you for free. Just go to our website and there it is. Are there any questions?
All right, we've got 2 questions so far. This is Rebecca, I'm your ACP technology person. Robbie was having some technical difficulties. Our first question is from David, who says, I've been told that the official responders are responsible once they are on the scene. Does that end the responsibility of the employee responders?
No, it doesn't. And you know, this is a very important question that you've asked, David. You know, I read these plans all the time. When the police and fire show up, you know, they take command. Yes, they do. But in practicality, what does that mean? And you're supposed to know this. This is your duty of care. These are the logistics that you have to know about, David, which is that they take command of the tactical situation, that room where the fire is, that place where the guy with the gun is, whatever is happening, they take tactical command of that. As far as overall command is concerned, they expect you, David, that you're going to take care of all of the other scores or hundreds or whatever it is employees who are subject to the emergency in your facility. So a fire occurs, the fire people are going to come in, they're going to take command of that, but they're going to turn to you and say, can you account for all your people? Where are your special needs personnel? How have you deployed your people to help us fight this fire? Because we're going to go fight the fire. That's what we're here to do. We're not here to organize the rest of it. You have to do that, and you have to continue to do that. So not only are they not the first responders, they are the official responders, and you are the first responders as employees, that continues after they come. All of it well coordinated, and it should be nice and juicy, nice and lubricated as far as that's concerned, as working with them. Do you know who these people are? Have you talked with them? Do you know how to work with them? This is all part of the logistics of putting together your plan, and of course, training your employees.
Wonderful, thank you. Cindy was wondering, oh, I'm sorry, Cindy. Yes, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available for ACP members on the ACP website in about 3 weeks. We have another question from an anonymous person. Any suggestions on leaders taking over continuity and response when they are not skilled or trained in continuity or emergency response?
Well, that's your duty of care, is to train them. And you have to train in most cases, whether it's a business, it doesn't matter what kind of business it is or what kind of work that you do or your business model. If you have a big enough group of employees, you'll probably have an emergency team, and then all employees who are the subject of what that emergency team does. So you're training your emergency team to do those things, to work with police and fire when they come, to implement what it is that they command of you. I want a head count. I want to know where your special needs persons are. I want to know what your hazardous materials on board are. These are all your responsibility and your duty of care. The fire chief doesn't show up, the police chief doesn't show up and say, oh, I'm going to take care of your hazardous materials. He doesn't, or she doesn't even know where they are. This is your responsibility, and you have to train your people to do it. And when you stand in front of the court and say, well, gee, I didn't know that, it sounds too difficult. You know, that's just that. You don't want to end that question that you just asked, Cindy, or whoever it was, anonymous, with the phrase, Your Honor, because that's not going to fly. You're supposed to do this. This is your duty of care, whether you like it or not.
Thanks, Bill. Pam was wondering, how can employees have a more prepared workplace at home?
Well, I'll give you the checklist, and that'll answer the question from a tactical standpoint. The question is, who's responsible here? Well, of course, if it's your house, you're responsible, but also the employer has responsibility here, and that's the law of the land. I'm not making this stuff up to piss you off. That is the law of the land, and it's been that way for 30 or 35 years as far as OSHA regulations are concerned. But the issues are, what about all that electrical stuff that you're using now because you brought your business into your house? Are you overloading it? Is a fire possible? What about trips, slips, and falls in your house, which is where the majority of trips, slips, and falls I've already heard always occur historically, but this is now your workplace. So what about that? So, you know, do you clear your walk so that visitors on a business basis during a snowstorm have a way in? So there are a lot of details here. And we can arm you with I hope your employers already arm you with the tactically with a checklist as far as how you're supposed to keep your office and home safe. If not, we can do that for you.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got another anonymous question. What if my CEO, like the 84% who believe they're doing a great job during the pandemic, just don't believe any of this is going to happen at our workplace when we return?
Well, it's a valid question, and don't for a moment think it isn't. You know, the denial out there on all this stuff before the virus and since the virus is just incredible. Before the virus, you know, most employers, and the statistics are there, like 98 of employers didn't have an emergency action plan that complied with the law. So that's ubiquitous. And now afterwards, they're all consumed by the one emergency, which is the virus, which is understandable, but it's not acceptable. The law says that you have to take responsibility of this, and the CEO says the Supreme Court of the United States is the responsible party personally, civilly, and criminally. So if something goes wrong, your CEO is the responsible party for getting this done. That's the law of the land, and if they're in denial, that's a real problem for safety on a tactical basis. And if something goes wrong and they get sued, and they will be sued, they're going to show up in court and say, really? I'm responsible civilly, personally, and criminally? The answer is yes, and all of those things have happened to CEOs in the last 5 years as far as the criminal part is concerned.
Great, I think we've got time for one more question. What are the liability issues here for my workplace if I raise all of these questions and get on the record?
Yeah, just don't listen to the children who tell you, oh, we can't talk about this or have an email or any paperwork on this thing because that will show that we recognize this thing and didn't do anything about it. That doesn't matter. All of this is law and has been for decades, and this is your duty of care. And so getting involved and starting a process of assessment, which is the first thing you need to do, is a threat assessment. Always do a threat assessment first. That's what the law and the regulations, the standards demand. This is expected of you. So when you show up at court because somebody sued you and you say, oh, well, we didn't know anything about this. Well, that's not true because you knew or should have known that you're supposed to have an emergency action plan. And an assessment is the first thing. So whether or not you want the paperwork to be there because it demonstrates that you're starting down this path. And contrition and best efforts are proof at court that you really were on the right track. Saying, gee, I didn't know anything about it and we don't have anything in writing isn't going to save you at all. That is a paper-thin defense, and you will be defeated.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. On behalf of ACP, I just want to thank you for being here, Bo, for your presentation, and thank all of you in the audience for joining us today. ACP's next webinar will be on Thursday, February 11th, and you can register for that on ACP's website. Please note that all of ACP's webinars and presenter slides will be available for ACP members on the website in the webinar archive. If you're not an ACP member, you can visit our website, acp-international.com, for more information on how you can be part of ACP. I want to thank all of you for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.